Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining and dialing in, tuning in. Welcome to Theme 4, session number 7, focusing on what are the synergies or trade-offs between ecosystem health and human health. On behalf of the co-moderator, Mary Trudeau, and myself, I welcome you all. This is going to be an exciting session. We have 4 exceptional speakers. We'll start with the first speaker. Each of the speakers will have about 15 minutes. If you can give a bit more time, finish in earlier, you'll have more time for brief questions. And then I believe we will have, towards the end, another question and answer. So please keep your questions on the Q&A, and we'll address those as they come. Our first speaker is Dr. Vedendrand Sharma Shuman. He's a PhD in Environmental Sciences, Scientific Officer, and National Environmental Laboratory in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. He works on solid waste management and climate change at the Open University in Mauritius. Dr. Sharma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabi. So as you can see on the screen, that's the topic of my research, influences of pesticide residue on attaining food security in Mauritius. And probably some of you might know that Mauritius is a small island developing state. It's a small country located, an island, most precisely located in the Indian Ocean near South Africa. And this study was conducted as part of my PhD, which I've already completed last year. So if I could ask you to move to the next slide, please. Right. You are all aware of the problem concerning food security in the world. There is an increasing demand to feed the world population, and agriculture is mainly responsible to feed, to give food to all these people. There is a problem of food security, food sufficiency, so crop productivity are at risk. There is also an incidence of pest and disease around the world. And farmers actually tend to apply more chemical fertilizer, and also at the same time, they apply a lot of pesticide because they think that while applying these 2 compounds, they will increase the crop yield, which will make them get more money. So there is an increasing pressure on the environment, and also the pests tend to become more resistant, and farmers actually, they are increasing the dosage so as to make the pesticide become more effective on their crop stand. Next slide, please. These 4 points are the objectives of my study. There was a survey that was conducted on farmers, among farmers in Mauritius. Secondly, actually, I analyzed the different cultivation practices following the farmers' survey in terms of pesticide, fertilizer, manure, municipal solid waste compost. And I conducted the study on Ducas carota, that is carrots. And thirdly, I actually assessed the soil quality and the different cultivation practices in terms of the nutrient content, heavy metal, in 2 selected agroclimatic regions. And lastly, the environmental impacts of the different cultivation practices were actually analyzed. There was a life cycle assessment that was done. Next slide, please. This is the first part of the study. As I mentioned before, the first part is a farmer survey, second one is an experimental trial, and the third one is a life cycle assessment. So for the first part of the study, as you can see on the left side, top left side of the screen, this is the map of Mauritius. And actually, I divided the map into 5 different locations. Red is for the north, and the other colors are for the south, east, west, and center part of the island. 300 farmers were interviewed across the different regions of the island. It was actually 60 farmers from each region. And the findings of the survey were quite alarming. Most farmers in Mauritius, about 95%, they actually use the pyrethroid group of pesticide, which is the most widely used group of pesticide. And many malpractices actually were detected while this survey was conducted. 44% of farmers, they actually exceed the dosage of pesticide without unknowingly. And there was a factor analysis that was done after the survey. And the results of the factor analysis actually showed that the influence from fellow farmers, they get influence from their friends, from their fellow farmers, which tend to force them to use all these different, to try all these different malpractices that are actually doing in Mauritius. And the right side of the screen, as you can see from the chart, 28.6%, they actually use a measuring cylinder to measure the amount of pesticide to apply in their crop. 27.3% of farmers, they actually use syringe. And you probably will be astonished to see 44.1% farmers, they actually are using the cap of the pesticide. And while doing so, when they use the cap of the pesticide, say if you have to measure 2 ml of X pesticide, and you actually thinking that the cap is measuring 2 ml, but actually it is not measuring 2 ml. It is actually measuring more than 2 ml. It might be measuring 15, 20 ml. So that's the problem that is happening in Mauritius. These farmers, they're actually thinking that they're measuring this amount of pesticide, but this is not happening. They are measuring more than that. And they are using this, and all these agricultural produce are coming in the market and people are consuming. So next slide, please. Now, seeing all these malpractices, all these things going on in agriculture, I actually decided to mimic what farmers are doing in the conventional practice. So there was an experimental trial that was run. And in the country, in Mauritius, we have 3 different agroclimatic conditions. We have the super humid, we have the subhumid, and we have the subhumid regions. So I actually chose the 2 extremes, the super humid and the subhumid region. And these 2 regions were selected, and the crop selected was carrot and pyrethroid. 2 different pesticides were selected in the pyrethroid, cypermethrin and deltametrin. The dosage that was used, as you can see in this the pictorial diagram that is here, the 7 different treatments. There was soil only, soil and compost. These 2 were organic. Soil, compost, and pesticide. Pesticide was actually applied. Cypermethrin and deltametrin were applied at the recommended dosage. And for the treatment 4, pesticide was applied at 3 times the recommended dosage. Treatment 5 is there was no pesticide. Treatment 6, pesticide at the recommended dosage. And treatment 7, again, we actually applied pesticide at 3 times recommended dosage to mimic, to see what actually farmers are doing. And for your information, treatment 6, soil, manure, fertilizer, and pesticide at recommended dosage is actually the treatment that is recommended by the Ministry of Agri-Industry in Mauritius for farmers to use. And the government has come up with a program called the MAURIGAP, which means the Mauritius Good Agricultural Practices. So this treatment, the treatment 6, is actually being recommended by the government in Mauritius. So next slide, please. These are the results, some of the results that came out from the study. And actually, pesticide was detected more than the, much more than the maximum residual limits, residual levels, where pesticide were exceeded 3 times. And as you can see on the slide also there was some of the nutrients that were tested in soil, NPK, calcium, magnesium, and some of the basic parameters, pH, cation exchange capacity, organic matter. And for heavy metals, lead, zinc, and cadmium were tested. And as I said before, where threefold pesticide were applied, 3 times more dosage was applied, it actually exceeded the maximum residue limit. So next slide, please. And the third part of the study, a life cycle assessment was done, and it was carried out to assess the environmental impact of producing 1 ton of carrots under 2 different scenarios. The first scenario was actually the conventional practice, chemical fertilizer and manure, where pesticide also was used at recommended dosage. Treatment in the experimental trial, it is at treatment 6. And this is actually the baseline treatment, the conventional practice, which is actually recommended by the government in Mauritius. And from the study, actually, we found that the second best treatment to obtain the second best yield was actually where municipal solid waste compost was used, together with the recommended dosage of pesticides. So only chemical fertilizer was substituted by municipal solid waste compost. So the findings of the life cycle assessment, on the whole, it was found that both scenarios have a negative impact on human health and the environment. However, in both cases, the most hazardous substance to use was pesticide. So next slide, please. So we're coming to an end with the conclusion and the recommendation from my study, and also future work that probably some of the researchers or myself I'm conducting in the near future. Pesticide was detected in carrots where the dosage was exceeded, and this I already mentioned before. So crops with excessive pesticide cannot be consumed, and this actually the government in all the major countries around the world, they have came up with legislations and major laws to prevent this happening. Hence, excessive pesticide application has a negative impact on food security. Yes, it has a negative impact, because if you're increasing the dosage, it doesn't mean that you will have more produce. You're actually producing food that people won't be able to consume. So there has to be more investigation and continuous monitoring of pesticide residue on edible crops. There should be also tighter regulation in food crops. There should be more sensitization campaigns regarding dangers of pesticide usage. And also the use of artificial intelligence to detect pesticide at early stage should be promoted. And at the end of the day, we know that the future of agriculture lies in organic farming. Coming with this AI thing, the artificial intelligence, we are actually working on a new project where we will be using sensors to detect pesticide in the streams and rivers nearby crops. So this will actually be like an indicator to see whether farmers are actually using more pesticide. But this is, the research is already, is still ongoing, and we are waiting for the preliminary results to come. So as I said, my final word and takeaway lesson is that the future of agriculture lies in organic farming. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and probably if we have some question, I would be happy to answer these questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Let's have the questions at the end during the Q&A session. Meanwhile, and before I welcome Robin, Dr. Craig to the floor, I'd like to remind all of the speakers to think of these 3 questions during the Q&A so that we can have some harmony within the session, which is looking at the trade-off. So the first question that I'd like to be thinking about, and then we can address that maybe in a roundtable towards the end, is how do you identify and capitalize on synergies between maintaining or restoring freshwater ecosystem health and providing water, food, and health benefit to people? So that's the trade-off in which that session is supposed to address. The second is, what role do markets and regulations play in capitalizing on synergies and reconciling trade-off between water, between water ecosystem and public health. The third is how can we protect and restore aquatic ecosystem urgently and at the scale for both biodiversity and human welfare. So please do think of these three sub-thematic overarching questions. How does your research address these three trade-off questions? So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robin Craig. She's the Robert Packer Trustee Chair in Law, Professor at the University of Utah Law School, and at the USC Gould School of Law in Los Angeles. And she has been an attorney and working on a title insurance fund professor at the Florida State University. Welcome, Robin, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. My topic is the use of shellfish and kelp aquaculture to take advantage of water quality and carbon trading to reduce coastal pollution, a project I am working on here in California. My aspect of it is the legal aspect of it, to figure out if these legal mechanisms for encouraging environmentally beneficial aquaculture in the ocean are possible in California. Next slide, please. So that raises the question, why, if you're thinking about food and water quality, would you focus on aquaculture? So this is a worldwide phenomenon. Wild capture fisheries leveled off in the 1990s. Some of them are near collapse. And to replace the increasing demand for seafood protein, aquaculture production has been increasing dramatically throughout the world. Next slide, please. Here in the United States, we have a little bit different trend. We do produce aquaculture, marine aquaculture, but as you can see, we emphasize shellfish and salmon only to a limited extent. So hit return, please. There's an animation. And this actually puts the United States in a good position if you're looking at environmentally friendly aquaculture, because bivalves do a great job of filtering water to improve water quality. Also, kelp aquaculture, which is relatively new in the United States, can sequester carbon out of the water column and also remove nutrients. So we don't have the dependence on finfish aquaculture, particularly offshore salmon aquaculture, that many other nations do, and that puts the United States in a good position to take advantage of these environmentally friendly forms of aquaculture. Next slide, please. All right, so what can aquaculture benefit the environment? Well, first of all, there's water quality improvements from shellfish aquaculture. Particularly oysters have been shown to remove about 38 kilograms of nitrogen pollution per acre per year. Now, obviously, species matter. Clam aquaculture has a far lesser ability to remove nitrogen pollution, but nevertheless, all bivalves to some extent remove nutrients from the water column. And our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has noted that restoring restoring oyster through aquaculture to even 40% of the Potomac River's bed would eliminate nutrient pollution in that river, and the Chesapeake Bay states, which has a huge nutrient pollution problem, are promoting oyster aquaculture to help clean up that bay. Next slide, please. All right, as I said, another benefit of pursuing these aquaculture forms at the bottom end of the food chain is carbon sequestration, and seaweed aquaculture in particular has shown that it has the ability to take in carbon dioxide, both from the water column and from the atmosphere, and sequester it at the bottom of the ocean. So there are some carbon benefits as well. Now, kelp aquaculture also removes nutrient pollution. It's not as efficient at it for the most part as bivalves. But again, if you do these environmentally friendly forms of marine aquaculture, you get not only food benefits, but water quality benefits and some removal of carbon, helping climate change and ocean acidification both. Next slide, please. So my research question is, in California, which it traditionally has not been a particularly friendly jurisdiction for aquaculture, can new kelp and shellfish aquaculture facilities legally harness some pollutant trading programs which would economically promote their expansion in California? So there are water quality trading programs that target nutrients, and California has a carbon offset program. So the legal research question was, could these coastal aquaculture facilities make use of those existing trading programs, hopefully helping to get these food production facilities off the ground economically as well as legally. Next slide. So nutrient trading comes through California's implementation of the Federal Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act most directly targets point source facilities, which have to be permitted if they are discharging pollution or pollutants into the navigable waters of the United States. But the Clean Water Act does not regulate non-point source pollution, such as runoff from farms, ranches, and forest lands. It also limits the treatment of nutrients in sewage treatment plants. So it doesn't necessarily get all of the nutrients out of sewage effluent. And so at the federal level, the United States Environmental Protection Agency developed the concept of trading, particularly for nutrients, that would allow permitted point source facilities, as you see up there at the top, pay non-point source facilities to put in buffer zones or other water quality improving mechanisms, best management practices, to clean up nutrient pollution overall. So the idea, please hit return, the idea for aquaculture would be, instead of targeting a farm or a ranch or a forestry operation, return please, you would use an aquaculture facility instead as the source of nutrient trading. That if you were growing kelp or bivalves in particular, the aquaculture operation is removing nutrients and could get payments to offset the nutrient pollution from a point source facility. And in the Southern California area, sewage, or treated sewage effluent running into the ocean is a big source of nitrogen pollution. So that would be a source of potential trading benefits. Next slide, please. All right, what's interesting legally is that the pieces exist in Southern California to put one of these trading programs together. And in California, they're done at a regional level on a watershed basis. So in the upper left here, you see stormwater plumes coming off the coast of Southern California, contributing to the pollution of the Southern California Bight. As I said, there's also treated sewage effluent that's a source of nutrient pollution flowing into that same area. That's been pretty well established, and the growing nutrient pollution problems in this area of the Southern California coast are increasingly recognized. Next slide, or press return, thank you. All right, plus the California regional water quality control regions have been willing to set up watershed-based trading programs that do impact marine waters. So Laguna de Santa Rosa watershed, for example, is one of the areas that has a trading program in place. So that has been known to happen for California water quality. Press return, please. All right, and we have information that both oyster aquaculture and, like I said, other bivalve aquaculture removes nutrients, and that economically, at least in Maryland, that being able to get credits in a nutrient trading program does help that aquaculture industry to succeed. So the pieces are all there, and legally it can be done in California. So the hope is to negotiate either with the Los Angeles Regional Authority or the San Diego Regional Authority to get a pilot trading program set up. Next slide, please. Which leaves the carbon credit issue. So California does have a cap and trade program, and it allows for offset credits. An offset credit under California's legal system is a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions achieved through an activity not covered by the cap, so you can't already be subject to regulation, but that can offset greenhouse gas emissions by a facility that is subject to the cap. Return. So those offset credits have to be real, additional, permanent, verifiable, quantifiable, enforceable, and established according to a protocol set up by the California Air Resources Board. Next. So California currently allows entities to meet about 8% of their compliance obligations from offset. That number is going to go down for a few years and then it go back up slightly. Next. There have been over 1,300 projects have been approved for these greenhouse gas offsets under the cap and trade program. Mostly so far forestry, dairy, and digesters. Aquaculture has not yet gotten an approved protocol, but rice cultivation does. So there are some parallels for setting up a protocol. Running Tide is an aquaculture company in Maine, a kelp aquaculture company in Maine. Primary Ocean, a kelp aquaculture company in Los Angeles, are already working on kelp carbon credits. So again, legally, this is possible to set up. And if a combination of carbon credits and nutrient credits can be set up under California law, it will go a long way to providing additional incentives for shellfish aquaculture and kelp aquaculture in California, which then would not only improve water quality, nutrient pollution, ocean acidification, help to combat climate change, but also provide new sources of food for local residents. So with that, I will say thank you and have enjoyed presenting. Look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you. We're going to take the questions at the end. Will give us a chance to really look at the dynamics and the cross-cutting issues that you all will be bringing. I remind all of you, I just pasted the questions that I'd like you to consider during the Q&A session. Thank you, Robin. Our next speaker is Dr. Sandra Yanni. She's a professor at the American University in Beirut. Her specialty is soil carbon, and more recently, she's more and more involved in water reuse and long-term impact of water reuse for agriculture. She's leading a FAO project in this topic, a regional FAO project in the MENA region. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you this evening. It's evening time here for me. And I want to acknowledge, before I start, to acknowledge the team who worked on this project from the American University of Beirut, AUB, from FAO and Texas A&M University. Next, please. Food security in Lebanon is a very important national priority, more so today, nowadays, when the country is actually going through a financial and economic crisis. And this has incurred very high costs for imported products, food products, as well as agricultural tools and supplies, and also energy, which is imported. Additional to that, we have some other challenges in the agricultural sector, which include water scarcity and limitations of the area of land that can be used for crop production. On the positive side, agriculture as a productive sector can contribute to the provision of nutritious food that is produced locally, and this can result in reducing the reliance on import, which has become costly. So the question we ask here is, can we produce our needs of nutritious food? And this is an important question from the public health side also, because as the economic crisis continues, the price of imported food and meat especially has increased, causing the inability to sustain a healthy diet for a good proportion of the Lebanese people. And then we ask, what would this production of local food need in terms of resources, resource allocation, and what would be the impact on the environment and on ecosystem health? Next, please. So water and energy resources are shared by multiple sectors. And this makes it very important to define the interconnectivity between water and energy for food production at the very least, and then link this to other sectors that share these resources. So in this study, we explored the availability and resource requirements that can allow the increase of production of specifically legumes and pulses, which are plant-based proteins that can replace some of the consumed or imported meat. Meat is expensive for one, and then it is also a heavy water user. So replacement of some of it with plant-based proteins is both healthy and has a smaller environmental footprint. We created for the study, we created a framework that defines and quantifies the interlinkages between water and energy for food, including the environmental footprint and the nutritional value of the produced crops. And we also focused specifically on the Lebanese style Mediterranean diet, because the crops within that, or the foods within that diet, can be produced locally within our climate. And using this nexus approach, we are then able to assess the trade-offs in resources under different production management scenarios. Next, please. So I'll just give the methodology very briefly. So you can see here that we have on the outside of this square, we have the limitation, which is on one side the land availability, and on the other side water availability. We identified three types of water sources, which are groundwater, surface water, and alternative water also, and three energy sources, solar and diesel and gasoline, solar, and also two other sources which are alternative but are currently not available and not being used. From there, we calculated the amount of energy required for water pumping and also energy that is required for agricultural operations, so tillage and all those things. We also accounted for the cost of production, including all the inputs that are required, and calculated the greenhouse gas emissions from energy use and the amount of land acreage that is required for this production of local production of food. As well, you can see here that the nutritional value of this locally produced food was also calculated. Next, please. So we assessed different scenarios compared to the base year, which was 2017. This is defined as the actual or current situation. In that year, 80% of the water for irrigation was from groundwater and 20% from surface water. This is the current situation now. Wastewater reuse is an alternative, but it's still unexploited. There is also heavy reliance on diesel, which is used between 70 to 100%, and on gasoline for a lower percentage. All of these things which are expensive to acquire. We also defined a self-sufficiency ratio, which describes our reliance on imports versus exports. Next, please. So these are the crops that were selected for this study. You can see on the left-hand side, those that are produced with 100% self-sufficiency, and those are being exported, while others, mostly those that are considered plant-based proteins, which are highlighted in red, those are produced with a low self-sufficiency and do have room for increase in local production. So these are the ones we focus on. Next, please. So first, if we take a look at this first scenario, which increases the production of these pulses that I mentioned from a low self-sufficiency up to 100% self-sufficiency. And as I said, this is for the purpose of improving general population health under the dire circumstances we are living. So keeping all other production the same as 2017, we can see that there is an increase in greenhouse gas emissions by about 12.6%, if I can see this correctly. However, on the other hand, we have an improvement on the nutritional aspect of the food basket by about 6.2%. For this scenario, to work, we would need to find more land to plant, and also there is a 12% increase requirement for fresh water or water and energy. Next, please. So one option we can consider here is to decrease the crops that are being produced with more than 100% self-sufficiency. And this puts us in a better shape in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and water and energy requirements. There would still be a need, however, to make up some extra land needs. Another option, next slide, please, that we can explore here to reduce the reliance on groundwater pumping and supplement it with treated wastewater. And this actually saves fresh water on one side, and energy also is saved because these systems can produce their own energy and reduces emissions compared to the current 2017 situation. There are additional benefits seen here because about 105 million meters cubed of wastewater is now treated and taken out of the sewage system, which is then dumped in rivers, or would have been dumped in rivers. and has caused extreme water contamination recently in Lebanon. So this also releases some fresh water to be used in other sectors, such as health and sanitation sectors. Next, please. So to conclude, investing in locally produced pulses results in an increase in nutritional value in the national food basket. And this can also be produced at lower prices than importing these foods. To overcome land limitation, we can invest in land restoration, breeding of high-yielding crops, expansion of agroforestry practices, so growing crops between trees, and other things that can also be done to allow this expansion in production. Pressures on fresh water and contamination of surface and groundwater can be relieved when alternative water is considered. At the same time, this would result in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. All of these positive implications have positive implications in general on public health. However, for an impact for change, the decision needs to be made on the national level by governments and policymakers, of course, and not just by academians talking about this. So there needs to be improvement in technologies, better policies and incentives, and public awareness and change in the behavior of both consumers and producers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you. Our last speaker for this session is Dr. Isabel Santos. She's a professor at the Centre de Recherches Rhumatologiques et Thermales d'Aix-les-Bains. Thank you, Isabel. Looking forward to hearing more. The center you work at seems very intriguing, so looking forward to learning more. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm a medical doctor, specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation, and also a balneology clinician used to work in Portugal and in France. First, so I would like to thank the scientific committee for the opportunity to share with you some deep thoughts about one of the natural richest resources of our environment, such as it is the natural mineral water used for many centuries to treat human disease. Next slide, please. In summary, I'm going to talk about facts, beliefs, and myths. First, groundwater, and especially sulfur water. Then, skin and its message transmission to the whole body, how they interact, and finally, some reflections. In fact, what we intend to convey is a critical thinking on the nature, mode, and reasons for the pathways of sulfur water through the skin of each rheumatoid arthritis patients. Next slide, please. Next. Thank you. Thank you. So, a natural mineral water is a true finger point of thermal waters. As you can see on your right, in the images of spa water sample, there are sulfur particles and growing bacteria between them. But to what extent are microorganisms differentiating thermal waters in terms of composition and, as such, responsible for their biologic actions, and how they communicate? Next slide, please. Thank you. Today, we know that sulfide in different formula is dissolved in geothermal waters of many hot springs. Sulfur cycle has an important role on the indigenous microbial community following alterations of subsurface biogeochemistry and microbial metabolic activities. Also, sulfur water contain microorganisms with DNA genes less or more active at the emergency spring, including the intervention of RNA may be source of unique composition and biologic function of water. And we also know that endogenous and exogenous hydrogen sulfide has many therapeutic functions, but it is still unclear what are the ideal concentrations of each chemical elements in order to be effective. Next slide, please. So, thank you. Nowadays, unfortunately, we have more and more autoimmune disease, and rheumatoid arthritis is an example. In this disease, after initiation of self-destruct or worse, after self-destruction completed, there is little to do. That's why it's so important to make an early diagnosis if prevention is not totally possible and treat as a whole. Well, we know that practically all cell types residing in and transiting through skin can exhibit immune functionality. And in the transdermal passage, at each step of the process, the active ingredient, that's to say here sulfur water, must be more soluble or driven by a concentration gradient so that it further penetrates the skin. Next slide, please. Another important point is that each person has specific commensal microbial flora, like the groundwater. And the skin is strategically placed to provide not only a barrier against a range of noxious stressors, but also to act as the periphery's sensing system. Thereby, in the periphery, the skin shows a big multifunctionality, namely acting as a real neuroendocrine organ and an immune system. So we have action at peripheral level. Next, please. Also, many studies demonstrate that personal life impacts with physical and emotional imbalances undoubtedly interferes with autoimmune disease. Don't we usually say that being human is automatically being emotional? Next slide, please. Well, what we have, on one hand, we can consider sulfur water bath as a true drug, as any topical therapy for body treatment with active principles that define its unique hydrobiogeochemical form. On the other hand, the human body has a big immune family, a true functional immunogenic system, which is a receptor of internal and external signals and the center of complex interaction between patient's skin, the rest of his body, and contact with sulfur water during the bath. In fact, future algorithms will almost certainly require combining genetic information with other biomarkers. Next slide, please. Many studies demonstrate the benefits of mineral resources, not only relevant economic values, but also promoting better health on the population. For that, it is of prime importance a good water resources management and the sustainability. However, the complexity of geothermal microbial communities acting or better interacting or the two things with the whole human body is yet a big and open challenge. Next slide, please. Finally, and according to World Health Organization, its words are increasing moving toward preventive medicine. Live in and use an healthy environment can promote and preserve natural riches, simultaneously contributing to help a better human well-being. In conclusions, let's work together, sharing different knowledges, create an inter- and multidisciplinary cooperation to advance the different steps of the understanding and so to build a fairer world with a good education, less waste, and more respect for the environment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for a very interesting water health study. I'm just thinking, this is outside my box, thinking aloud that is what's good for the skin, good for the plant? Because if that's the case, we build the nexus between the water, the food, and the health. So thank you. If I may ask again, I did post the 3 questions on the board, and I'd like maybe starting with Dr. Sharma. Again, let me read those questions aloud. I did post them. Let me post them again. I'm trying to find, okay, how do we identify and capitalize on synergies between maintaining or restoring freshwater ecosystem health and providing water for food and health benefits for people? That's one. Second, what role do markets and regulations play in capitalizing on synergies and reconciling trade-off between water for ecosystem, food, and public health? The third is how can we protect and restore aquatic ecosystem urgently and at the scale for both biodiversity and human welfare? So please, let's spend a couple minutes for each of the panelists, starting with Dr. Sharma addressing these questions. And this is important because we're all under the same theme and to build coherence and continuity in the discussion. Dr. Sharma.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Rabi. And coming to the first question about food and health benefit for people, I would basically focus on the excessive use of chemical fertilizer and pesticides in agriculture, because that's my main area of expertise. And I will answer this question as an environmental scientist. So the problem with to provide fresh water in terms of restoring health benefits, and also the water probably could be used for potable purposes. If I would answer this question in relation to my country, Mauritius, there is farmers actually, they are using a lot of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And while doing so, there is leachate of these nutrients into the freshwater ecosystems. And we all know that when these things go into these especially these nutrients, when they go into the ecosystem, it causes things like eutrophication, algal blooms, which are not good for the health of the water. So this actually, it decreases the quality of the water. Secondly, if we apply a lot of pesticide and there's leachate of pesticide in these freshwater system, this actually happened in Mauritius because after a ban was imposed on groups of pesticides such as organochlorine, organophosphate, carbamate, neonicotinoid. The main pesticide that was being used in Mauritius was pyrethroid. So pyrethroid actually, which is when it gets into water, it actually kills all these aquatic organisms. So a lot of people that are dependent on food to feed on
Dr. Sharma, to make room for additional questions, please stick to the 2 minutes.
Okay, so my main area of concern is that we should actually try to reduce chemical fertilizer and pesticide usage to be able to provide fresh water for people, and also the water should be available for aquatic animals as well, organisms as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Robin, would you address the 3 questions and how your study relates to them?
Okay, I think one common theme among all 3 is, as all the presentations have indicated, species that are out there and geological formations and bacteria are all providing functions that can help us out. And so one of the points of my presentation is that we can harness the fact that certain species that can be used for foods low on the food chain can also help us with water quality, and there are markets available to make that happen. I think Dr. Santos is making a similar point that for reasons we don't quite understand, so the sulfur bacteria complexes are good for human health, and protecting the water quality to keep that going is a good thing. So again, like I said, recognizing that there are multi-functions out there, getting away from monocropping, getting away from putting chemicals and letting those natural interactions help us out, I think is a productive path forward.
Thank you, Robin. To what extent the carbon credit and the trade that you mentioned will make a dent in terms of the system, the aquaculture system that you're talking about? Is it for real? Is it going to make a difference to livelihood of these farming, the scale up, or is it just a political win for the farmers?
You know, that is still being studied. It depends on how much ocean acidification you're experiencing already, which is where it would have the more direct impact. But the indications are that it could make a real difference, particularly if you are doing kelp farming at a large commercial scale. But that's part of the excitement of the projects I'm involved in, is trying to figure out exactly what those benefits could be and how large the aquaculture operation would be to produce them.
It would be interesting to compare these systems in terms of their environmental friendliness with some of the bioenergy activities that are happening in coastal areas, but very interesting. Thank you. Let me ask Sandra to comment on the questions.
Yes. So addressing the first question about identifying synergies, and so as not to repeat, the points made before, considering my location in the Middle East, at least, there's need for data and identifying the quantities, first of all, of available fresh water and the water needs for the country for all sorts of production and sectors. This is to begin with. We need data. Considering alternatives and also quantities of alternatives that are available and the energy needs for those alternatives. So like wastewater as an alternative for fresh water, for example. And then considering the interconnectivities of energy for water, for food, not just within one sector, but across sectors. Do you want me to comment on the other two questions?
That would be fine. Maybe we'll come back in a circle. I'd like to give the floor to Isabel. Isabel, you're muted.
Sorry. I think that spring water, the water is a natural resources that is frequently forgotten, and it's a pity because it's not expensive, it's natural, and I think together with some other specialties like yours on waters, geologists and so on, we can work together to make some economies and synergies to work and take the natural resources and especially in this time of the great crisis, as we are all the world are. Of course, different countries are in crisis in different degrees, but I think together we can make more equal opportunities to share this knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. Robin, there were two questions that you addressed on the Q&A box, but for the benefit of the audience, would you mind taking a minute to respond so that everybody would get the benefit of your response? Just a minute. There are two questions directed to you.
Yeah, certainly. So the first one was that fresh and marine waters are usually managed separately in the law and as a matter of policy, which is true. My solution links them, which is also true. And how do we improve the overall management of water quality from source to sea? That's a complicated question that varies a lot from country to country. But the best starting point is to recognize that coastal watersheds don't end at the coast. They do extend into the ocean. And recognizing that fact from watershed-based management perspective is a good way to start working that connection into the equation. There's some important public health reasons to do that as well. If you're talking about sewage overflows, for example, that has a direct impact on coastal health. The other question was, is aquaculture of shellfish possible in freshwater? The answer is yes, there is freshwater shellfish aquaculture, but obviously you need to use freshwater species and preferably, as in all of this, native species.
Thank you, Robin. There was one question posted also on the Q&A about water conservation that must take place in parallel with the food security. Do we have a volunteer to take that on? If not, I'm going to ask either Dr. Sharma or Dr. Yanni, because they're both worked in that space.
Well, I can start off. I would say yes, that's true. But at certain extremes, if you're not conserving the water, you are damaging your food security. So yes, they should go in parallel, but if you're in a place that is experiencing increasing drought, climate change, less water supply, the conservation may be absolutely necessary to the food security.
Thank you, Robin. Dr. Sharma, would you like to respond to that question?
I actually can't find the question, Dr. Rabi. Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, it's a comment on the chat, on the Q&A, that water conservation must take place in parallel with and food security.
Well, the problem with food security is there is a burden to feed the population. So if you conserve at the same time, and also you have to meet up with the demand to supply food. So it's actually a tricky thing. So probably this thing should go. We should give some time so that the way that we produce food should start shifting, and at the same time then we start shifting the way that we produce food. What I mean to say is we start by using organic means or reducing the amount of pesticide and chemical fertilizers. So obviously when we start reducing the amount of chemical inputs in agriculture, this will lead to conservation of our natural resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Trudeau, do you have any questions for the panel that may enrich the discussion?
Yeah, so thank you to everybody on the panel for really super presentations. I do have a question for Dr. Sharman about potential synergies with municipal solid waste, and maybe you could explain a little bit about what that is, and waste management and potentially farming, and maybe public education also. Even something as simple as putting a measurement on the cap of the pesticide so people can measure it. What has been done in terms of trying to resolve some of these issues?
Right. If I may take example with my specific country where I come from, Mauritius, the government has come up with a regulation which is called the Use of Pesticide Bill. And this has been passed as an act of parliament in Mauritius, where we are regulating the amount of pesticide coming up in the food industry, in the agriculture. So there is like a worksheet. The farmer is given a worksheet. The amount of pesticide he is applying, the amount of chemical inputs he's applying in agriculture. There is a record. There's record of the amount of chemical inputs that are being used in farming. So by doing this, we actually can check whether these people are going by with the limits. And to answer your question regarding municipal solid waste compost, I know there is a lot of question using municipal solid waste compost, because we all know that this type of compost, which is basically not green waste compost, it's compost coming from landfills. There is a lot of concern with, especially in terms of pollutants in regards to heavy metals coming from these municipal solid waste compost. But, if we see it in different ways, something is better than nothing. So in terms of leaving these waste in these landfills where they continuously are polluting the environment in terms of leachate, air pollution, all this is coming out from the landfills. We are actually transforming these waste into some type of product that we can use in agriculture as fertilizer. I hope I have been able to answer your query. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And maybe if I could also ask Robin a question about consumption of the, the shellfish that are being used. Are there any concerns with respect to the treatment? They're taking up, for example, metals. Is that something that is of potential concern?
Yes, if they are taking up toxics or harmful bacteria, harmful algae in the water, preventing a harmful algal bloom, that's a great result. But just like when you're having a harmful algal bloom and you can't eat the shellfish, you wouldn't want to be eating those as well. So, and if you do have heavy metal contamination and some other kinds of toxics, and those are being concentrated in the shellfish flesh, needs to be tested, but probably don't want to be consuming them if they are in fact concentrating those metals. So yeah, that is a concern. Nutrients don't seem to pose much of a problem, but if they are filtering out other kinds of harmful organisms or chemicals, you do have to test.
Great, thank you. And there is one comment in the just in the chat. I think it's a comment more than a question, but so problems have started to appear on the coast of Turkey. It's been announced that excessive use of cleaning products during the pandemic period caused nitrate and phosphate accumulation. So I don't know if anybody has a comment on that.
I'm impressed, Mary, with instant ability to translate from Turkish. Thank you.
That's often a problem when you're using a lot of detergents. That was a huge problem in some of the Great Lakes in the United States. Coming off of the cities using detergents, phosphate is a common ingredient in detergents. So yes, it's possible. I don't know the particular situation in Turkey, but that is a documented water quality issue.
I think those are all the questions we have. Rabi, send it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, all the speakers. It's been really a very rich session. Thank you for the audience, for your questions and the interactions. Thank you for the speakers for really sharing excellent case studies that are quite different, but then they're all, as Robin mentioned, there's a lot of similarities in the trade-off that we see. And there's a thread that connected all of this. So thank you all. I enjoyed it. Mary, on behalf of Mary and I, thank all the speakers, all of you out there.